You're listening to the Kingfisher Podcast with Eric and Bron Whitley. Thanks for joining us once again.
Welcome, everyone. It's great to be back with you again. And today we're going to be talking about what it means when God says no, or how do we deal with that?
Yeah, we live in a society that doesn't know how to respond when they're given the answer no.
Yeah, people don't hear that often these days.
No, it's not. I know everybody jokes about kids and never hearing the word no, but I think we're all kind of rebellious, naughty children, and we don't like hearing no. We don't like being pushed back from a desire that we have or an idea that we have.
Yeah, I know our kids don't.
No, they do not.
Although it was the first word that each of them learned to say.
Yeah. I think
so they definitely heard it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, that might be their first word because it's a power word. You know, in a lot of ways, it's kind of a power word.
You're setting a boundary as a baby. You know, obviously as a baby, when they say no, they're setting a boundary. And that's something they learn from very young.
Yeah. Well, I think we use that word a lot when they're little.
We do.
Don't touch that, no. You know, and that's all right. But I think you and I both in our life and in our time of knowing God have had some pretty significant events that have happened or experiences, I guess, where we really wanted something. And in the end, God's answer was no.
Yeah. And
it was quite traumatic. I'm going to share some of my personal stuff, and it was really traumatic and very
hard.
Depressing and disappointing, and it was really, really hard when I finally, God really gave me a very hard no.
Yeah.
I was definitely the nagging child going, but what if, but
what about this way or that way or...
Fine, I'll do it myself,
Yeah.
But it was a really firm no from God, and it really impacted me.
Yeah. And I think if you listen today and all you learn from both of our stories is learn faster to listen to God's no, then I'll be happy with that.
Well,
because we did not learn fast.
And to learn that when he says no, it's not because he's withholding something. It's because he's holding on something better for us.
Yeah.
It's not about withholding what we think is best. It's actually probably something that might even be good, but he actually has something better if you're willing to accept that and to walk in obedience to his direction.
Yeah, and he knows us better than we know ourselves, and he knows what's best for us, and he knows what, last week we talked about, living your best life, having the happy, blessed life. He knows how to get us to that place, and we don't. Some of the things that you and I have wanted wouldn't necessarily have given us that happy, blessed life. No,
and I often talk about, there's an old Garth Brooks song that talks about thanking God for his unanswered prayers.
Yeah.
It's that little hook or whatever for the lyric, but basically him just thinking back going, I'm glad you said no to me.
Yeah.
I can see with my sight now, what's it, hindsight now, 2020 being
hindsight is 2020. So true.
Actually when you said no, it was a good thing.
Mm. Yeah, I think there are times, especially when we're younger, where we have these plans and we have these goals and dreams and ambitions, and sometimes we can reach for those and achieve those, and other times they don't happen. And when you're living in a relationship with God, sometimes he just closes the door. There's a lot of sayings about that, like when God closes one door, he opens another. And that sounds trite, but it is actually pretty accurate.
There's a lot of truth to it. Sometimes the opening and closing has a gap between.
Yeah, that doesn't always happen immediately.
between those two things, and sometimes we have to go searching for that open door. But yeah, I think there's truth to that for sure. Well, to share my story, as I grew up, music was always a really huge part of my life. From the time I was 8 years old, I sang in the Atlanta Boy Choir, and that was a really prestigious thing in our area. Well over 100 boys auditioned for 4 spots, and I got one. And so I spent many years with them touring the world. I got to go all around the world singing with this choir, and just some amazing experiences. And so it sort of birthed this real deep love of music in my life.
Yeah.
And as I grew older, music was always a big part of what I did, whether it was at school or at church. I was always involved in music ministry stuff at church, and even studied music at university and received a scholarship to do that. And so I was very successful with music. I had talent, and I had a drive and just a love and a passion for music. But probably from the time I was 10 years old, that was all I wanted to do. I wanted to be a professional musician, and I wanted to be signed to a record label, and I wanted to live on a bus. Like, that was my dream.
Yes, you used to say that all the time.
I mean, that was my dream, is I wanted to live on a bus and travel the world doing music.
I'm the Debbie Downer that used to say to you, really, a bus? I don't know that would be so great.
It sounded awesome to me.
Yeah, it was for you. It was like the pinnacle.
It was. It really was. And for many years, I really pursued that. And I had a lot of amazing opportunities. When I was 15, I felt called into the ministry, and I thought, well, it'll probably be music ministry. I'll be a worship pastor. And that was part of my decision of studying music at university. I didn't feel called to go to Bible school or anything like that at that point. So I thought, well, I better be trained as a musician if this is the journey I'm going to take. And so all through probably my late teenage years and all through my 20s, I was pursuing music. And
yeah, when I met you, you had a guitar in your hands. You know, you were leading worship at a very large church. Yeah.
Yeah, you walked in and I was probably setting up sound and playing guitar and leading worship.
You did a lot of setting up and tearing down of equipment.
Yes. Part of that dream I don't miss is setting up sound gear. But, you know, everywhere I went, everything I thought about, I'd lay down at sleep at night thinking about music. I would wake up in the morning thinking about music. And then I started bands and I worked in studios. And we had one band that was really, really successful on a sort of regional level. And, you know, we did really great, like as far as...
Yeah, I call you semi-professional because you got paid to gig. It just wasn't enough for you all to do full time.
Yeah. I mean, we got paid as much as the guys who were signed to indie contracts and that sort of thing. Yeah. And we got to play all the festivals with all the big bands.
You got to open for Casting Crowns.
I mean, that was our first concert with that band, was opening up for Casting Crowns. And it was a Christian band. And so I thought, I'm doing this for God. I will say that. It wasn't secular music. It was Christian music. And I had sort of committed in my heart that I wanted to do Christian music for God. And I wanted to lead people to Him through music. So I was doing a good thing. Right. I mean, I wasn't necessarily wanting to be famous and rich and all of that, but I wanted to be a professional musician who glorified God and brought others to Him through my art. And I worked really hard to do that. And, you know, we got to play in Nashville several times and do showcases for record labels. We did a showcase for Sony Records, you know, so we pretty much as an independent band went as far as we possibly could without being signed.
Yeah.
And we did those things and it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And at that point, we were starting to be in our later 20s. Of course, several people in the band, if you've ever been involved with bands, you know, Bryan Adams' Summer of 69, it has a line, you know, Jody got married and the other guy quit. And, you know, that's what living in a band and doing that, like you're constantly finding a new drummer or a new guitarist or something like that is going on. Because life changes, and most of the time you're doing it in your 20s, and that's a very turbulent time.
Well, one of the band members was working in Mississippi and then would come back on the weekends to play with your band in Atlanta.
Yeah, so...
I mean, that's commitment right there.
He was playing all over the place, and he was a working musician, but very talented. But yeah, he was playing all over the Southeast in the United States to make a living doing music. And long story short... we finally kind of get to a point where you're ready. We were living in Atlanta and you're ready to move back to Australia and
have a family.
Part of that was to have babies, and you wanted to be close to your family when you had babies.
Yeah.
And I did not want to let go of this dream of doing music. And we had kind of reached a pinnacle and we had gone kind of down. I won't lie. The last couple of years before we moved, the band was still performing and still successful and all of that, but sort of the momentum of it had peaked and we were declining.
After your showcase with Sony, it kind of petered out because people realized it may not be going to happen.
Yeah. But I just was so resistant to this move to Australia because I knew I had to give up my sort of dream doing music. When you're a musician, it's all about who you know. And, I had spent years building connections and working with people, and people knew me and I knew them, and I could call them, they could call me, I could find work. And I knew going to a new country, plus Australia is a smaller music industry here. It's very hard to make a living doing music in Australia.
Especially as you can't as Christian musicians. There's no scene for that.
So much harder here. So I knew to move here meant it was over. At least for the most part, I knew it was over. And I was very resistant to that. And in some ways, we talk very openly about this. I blamed you. I was angry with you for saying we're moving to Australia.
Yeah, and I didn't give you probably enough compassion for that because I was so ready to move. I had been holding on for 6 years and I had had enough and I was ready to move. Plus it was all getting paid for by my company. So,
I mean, in all that, God had a plan. God actually orchestrated so many parts of that. And I'm sure you were sick because being a musician, I was constantly gone. I was out all night long and traveling and doing different things. I wasn't home a lot and I wasn't real available when I was doing music full time.
Yeah.
And so you were ready to have a family and to connect and to come back home. And I often laugh because you did all the paperwork, you did all the preparation, and I very passive-aggressively did nothing to plan for this move.
Yes.
I think I packed my bags, and that was about the amount of effort I put into this move, and you did everything else.
Yeah.
Because you were like, we are going. And so reluctantly in 2006, here I go to Australia. And so we get here. Now, during that time, I also worked as a pastor through all those times. So I worked as a pastor, and that was my day job, as we talk about in music industry. So that was my day job, was as a pastor, and then I would be doing music at night, and I also did music within the church a lot. And so we get to Australia. I know no one, no connections, nothing there, and I'm having to come to this understanding that this is done. And I fell into a really deep depression because this was my dream from the time I was 10 years old, maybe even younger. So 20 plus years of pursuing this dream really actively, and I had to let it go.
Yeah.
And I was mad at you. I was mad at God. And of course, my family didn't want me to move. So I had they weren't happy with me. No one was happy with me.
Yeah.
And so I just felt very alone and very discouraged in all of it, going, all this effort I have put in all these years has amounted to nothing.
Yeah.
And amazingly, the church that you went to while you were at university ended up hiring me as a pastor, and it's the church we still attend today. And just being a part of this church, it's a very healthy, vibrant, Bible-believing, Holy Spirit-filled church. I slowly started to be built back up, and God started to give me a new dream. Now, I know we're talking about what do we do when God says no. So learn from me. I'm going to share.
Don't do what Eric did.
I'll share my mistakes and just do the opposite. I'll just say, do the opposite, because I let it get me into, as I say, a very deep depression. Yeah. I was angry. I withdrew. I didn't turn to God for any comfort. And so I was looking for comfort in other places and just not finding it. And it made me absolutely miserable. Mm. Now, some people would say, well, that sounds so exciting to get to move to Australia, particularly if you're listening in the U.S. Most people in the States don't get to visit Australia, and it is an amazing, beautiful, wonderful place. It really is a pretty cool country. It's very unique.
We have a good life, yeah.
Yeah, and I've come to love it, obviously, but in those early days, I didn't care about the beaches and the palm trees and the nice weather and the beautiful birds and all the good stuff and the 4 weeks holiday and everything that you get when you come to Australia. I didn't care about any of that. All I cared about was God had told me, no, this is not happening.
Yeah.
And, he hadn't said no to me in a direct way. It was just circumstantial. This is a circumstantial no.
It was a shut door.
It was.
Yeah.
Slammed shut hard. With me standing outside going, but open back up.
Knock, knock,
yeah,
knock.
I'm still here. And I do think I did respond in some ways positively, because once I started to serve at this church, I really started to try to apply what I had learned with all that other stuff, and got involved with the music ministry there, and was able to speak into young people's lives. I was the young adult pastor at that time, and we had a lot of musicians or aspiring musicians, and I was able to really feed into their lives. And that's where my focus changed, was from me, woe is me and poor little me, to, well, what can I do to put you a foot forward?
Yeah.
How can I help you forward?
And I think that's really what your gifting is. And so that would have brought you a lot of sense of satisfaction, because God knows, what we need. And we've talked a lot about this over the years. And I have always said to you, I'm grateful that God closed that door, because I saw, there were people in the band, I won't name names, but who were, it wouldn't have been great to get into a contract with that one person in particular. And, that I think was really a good thing that we didn't go in that direction, because you would have been tying your life to a group of people basically and been stuck doing that for who knows how long. And I also don't think it would have been very conducive to a stable family life to have you on the road all the time and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, what we have today and the relationship that we have today would not be the same had I been living on the road. I mean, I do think it's probably more of a single person's profession in a lot of ways, unless your spouse is a musician as well and comes with you. But it did make me have to reevaluate my goals and my value, my purpose, my worth, all of that.
Who you were.
Yes. And so God had to rebuild my identity from I'm rock star dude, playing guitar and bass, to no, you're a pastor. And actually the things that he's put into me, as you say, like my greatest joy is seeing someone overcome their obstacles and become the fullness that God has for them. So whether that's in a profession or them as a person in their faith, I love to see people just grow and blossom into all that God purposed for their lives when he created them. And I just get such great joy out of that and enjoyment. I enjoy doing that, training people, teaching people. This is why Kingfisher exists and why I write books on how to develop prayer teams and how to hear God's voice, and why we do the podcast is because I'm wanting to invest into other people and help you take steps forward in your faith so that you can be all that you can be, to use the old Army slogan, be all you can be in God and in life.
I think, I've been through a similar experience to you. It was earlier in our marriage when we moved to the United States. God closed a lot of doors for me, just slammed them shut in my face. That caused me a lot of angst as well, and caused me a lot of health issues and different things too. And I think what I kind of learned from that was that we need to just actually trust God, not just say, oh yeah, I trust God, but to actually trust that not only is he a good God, but he has a good plan, a better plan for our life than we do. He knows what's best for us. And part of that, I think, is really learning about identity. We talk about identity a lot, but if you know who you are in him, it doesn't matter what occupation you're pursuing at that time. And those will change with the seasons of your life. You might be a pastor at one point, and then a teacher at another point, and then a musician at another point, but you're still you. You're still a child of God. You still have the same giftings and the same heart and the same relationship with God and all those things. And it doesn't change your value. It doesn't change your worth. It doesn't change how he sees you. But we get so hooked onto what we're doing as part of our identity rather than understanding who we actually are despite what we're doing and what's going on around us.
Yeah, I think you're completely accurate. It's just who we are doesn't change. It's just our focus of direction, our focus of where investing ourselves and investing our giftedness, it's that focus changes. So like right now I'm teaching school as part of what I'm doing. And so it's not the same as being a pastor, but yet I'm still able to invest into children's lives. Now I have some maybe different agendas as far as learning, and they have to pass this test and all of that, but I'm still trying to invest in them to know that they're valued, to know their worth, to know they can do it, to see them overcome when they're challenged, to hopefully see God in me as a teacher.
Yeah, and now that you've
awesome.
Yeah, and you've been through all these experiences, hopefully you have learned that it doesn't change who you are, and it doesn't change how God sees you and what he's called you to and gifted you for. It's just a season. It's just a part of life. You know, we go through all these different seasons.
Yeah, I hadn't anticipated really getting into identity with this topic, but really, I guess my advice becomes, you are not what you do. And I think a lot of people, it's very easy, particularly if you're successful in something, to sort of see yourself that's your value in what you do because you do it well. Whatever your role is, but that's not who you are.
Yeah.
As Christians, we are children of God, and that comes with royalty, that comes with a priesthood, that comes with spiritual gifts, that comes with an inherent value and worth, regardless of your place in life or your role in life or your career. None of that matters. That doesn't change who you are. It's just what you do. And I think there's a danger many times, and I think a lot of people end up as I did, because I saw myself as a musician, and I didn't think I had become who I truly was until I was a full-fledged professional musician. Now, signing my name at the bottom of a piece of paper would not have actually changed anything.
No.
It would have not changed a single thing in my life.
And it wouldn't have filled that hole inside of you that was looking for that sense of meaning and purpose, because you were a semi-professional musician. You did go to big gigs and you had thousands of people come to watch you play. So how would it have been any different just signing a piece of paper? It wouldn't have given you the validation that you were looking for. What you needed was God.
Exactly. Now, I was a believer through all that, but I had not let God give me my sense of value. I was trying to achieve it.
Yeah.
And so I guess
we all do that.
That's another warning for those of you listening, is not to let your successes and failures determine your value and your worth.
Yeah. And sometimes God closes a door and it can feel like a failure, but it's really him redirecting us. And I've had situations where I've been involved in a ministry where God's prompted me to leave that ministry. I think I've spoken about this before, and I've just kind of kept going because I didn't want to let go of the ministry, and then he's slammed the door shut, and it was painful. And so it's also about listening for God's promptings for when it's time to change. Don't hold on to that as part of who you are. If you feel like he's calling you in a different direction, let go, hold loosely onto things and let that go and move on to the next thing. And when he does shut the door, just realize it's not a failure of anything that you've done necessarily. He might just want you in a different direction.
Yeah, being at school, of course, I saw a poster the other day. I think it was a Thomas Edison quote, and it said, "I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that it doesn't work."
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we need to have that perspective that it's not a failure. I mean, again, statistics are like entrepreneurs who are very highly successful often have failed multiple times. You know, they've been bankrupt, or their business has failed, or whatever, their idea has failed before they become super successful. And it's just not being, I guess, inhibited by what we consider failure, but to get up and keep going.
And I think if you feel as though God is saying no to you about something or closing a door, don't see that as a rejection by God. Don't see that as some sort of statement about your value or worth. Instead, spend time prayerfully considering what it is you feel like he's saying you should do next. And he might not be speaking to you about that yet. You might say, well, I'm not hearing anything. I'm not getting any sense. That's okay, because sometimes that happens as well.
For sure.
And it doesn't mean you're going the wrong direction at all. So just keep going and keep trusting and dive into the word and use that as an opportunity to spend more time with God and grow your relationship with him. That's what I wish that I had done when I was going through the hard time. It might have still taken the 2 years that it took, but maybe I could have grown my intimacy with God and lived from a place of joy instead of being angry and depressed.
Well, I think we often, and I've talked about this before, when bad things happen to us, we tend to blame God. And I think it's usually, I don't even know, I would venture to say near 100% it's not God's fault, but yet we like to blame God and we get angry with God. And so the way we need to respond to a closed door and when he says no is to ask, well, what is the next step? Where are you leading me? You know, I know a lot of times we want to ask why.
Yeah.
I know that was one of my things. Why? I worked so hard. I've done everything right. I've done everything I'm supposed to do. You know, I practice my guitar 6 hours a day. I've done all these things. I've learned everything I need to learn. So why are you not giving this to me? Well, the thing I know of God is he never takes something from us, okay, or closes a door, but he doesn't, I want to say it like this, he doesn't take something from us and leave us empty-handed. He always has something in exchange. You know, when we do prayer ministry, that's one of our techniques that we do. Oftentimes somebody will have a burden or a lie or something that they're holding on to, unforgiveness, and we do a visualization where we go, God, I'm going to give this to you. So I'm holding on to this, and I shouldn't be holding on to this. I'm going to give it to you, and we ask him, what do you have in exchange for us? You know, or what do you have in exchange for me? And I love that question in prayer ministry, because the things that God gives back to people are always so incredible.
Yeah.
So he takes our burdens and then he gives us blessings.
Yeah. And I know that for you, there's been a time where God closed a door, but then he didn't open another door for a long time. And you were sort of asking, you know, why God, and where am I supposed to be going now? And you didn't hear anything for a really long time. But I got the sense that it was because this was a time of healing for you. And I think, you know, that be aware of that as well. So if you feel as though God's closed a door, but he's not revealing to you what's next, then what are you wanting me to do, God? Do you want me to spend this time in rest and healing? What are you wanting me to learn from this situation?
Yeah, often there's a season of growth or a process that God wants us to go through, because he can't give us what's next until we're ready for it, until we're mature enough or obedient enough, or, I mean, and that, I don't even like how I said that, but there's something that has to happen. There's
something you have to learn
in us. It's not about us doing or whatever. And I don't mean to give that impression, but it's like he wants to change something in us for good. And until we're
heal, he might want to heal something.
And it's often us being resistant to that inhibits that or holds it up. And until we're willing to lay that down at his feet, he can't give us the next thing. I mean, it's like if my hands are full of something, you can't hand me anything because I can't hold it. I have to lay down what I'm holding on to so I can receive something new. And all of this that we're saying, I want to also say, we're saying turn to God and spend time with God. That's going to be the last thing you want to do. You know,
you won't want to.
When that door closes, the last thing we want to do is worship him. The last thing we want to do is be with him. The last thing we want to do is pray or read his word or go to church maybe.
Yeah.
That's the last thing we want to do.
We're usually grumpy.
Yeah. And resentful and bitter and blaming God and judgmental and all that. But if you can find the maturity to press past that discomfort and your own emotions and your own feelings and turn to God, that's where you'll find that open door.
Yeah.
And I think the quicker you can do that, the quicker the new door opens.
Yeah, learn faster than we did.
Yes. That's my best piece of advice. Don't do what I did. But God always has something new. So until we can, approach him, I think, with open hands, he can't give us that new thing. Well, I hope you will be encouraged from our discussion today. And if you are in between those closing and opening doors, my best advice is turn to God, press into him, wait on him, because I promise whatever he has for you is better than you can imagine. The Bible even says that. He often has so much more than we can ask or imagine. And so wait on him, because what he has is always going to be best. This has been the Kingfisher Podcast with Eric and Bron Whitley. Have a blessed day.